Can someone say something racist and not be a racist? Can someone say something racist against someone else and not be a racist? Is it possible to be grossly offensive to each other with no consequences? This is following the racism row, which main donor to the Conservative Party is alleged to have said in an open meeting that black MP Diana Abbott makes him feel like hating all black women and she should be shot. And his friends are busy briefing the media that the man is not racist. Anti-racist practitioner Pheona Matovu joins me now in the studio. And on the line, we have Virginia Toyi.
Hello.
Good morning, Virginia Toyi, here, diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, also joining us on this conversation. Maybe I'll start here in the studio, Pheona. What do you make of of this topic? This suggestion that people, someone can make a racist comment against somebody and then turn around and claim not to be racist.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. And please allow me to honor the woman who is in the middle of that row, if that's okay. Diane Abbott is the first black woman MP, the longest serving MP. Those are the shoulders on which we stand as black women. And for her to be referred to in that way, what message are we sending to other women, other young women that are looking for exactly those same opportunities to represent us and to serve our society? In terms of can we say racist things and not be racist? So first of all, we need to understand what is racism. And we need to understand what is anti-racism. Racism is not a destination, or to be racist is not a destination, nor is anti-racism. So I'm going to first explain anti-racism and come to that question. Anti-racism, to be an anti-racist, you must make the decision to be. It is a journey, it is not a destination. It requires one to choose to challenge racism in all its forms in ourselves and around us. You cannot be surrounded by racist views and racism all your life and expect not to be racist. So we have all internalized racism, and these views have been embedded in our society, in our norms, and they've been normalized. So if you express a view that is racist or behave in a racist way, you are being racist. There are no two ways about it. A racist is one who expresses those views, who expresses views of racial hierarchy, who expresses actions that lead to racial injustice and inequality. An anti-racist actively supports the opposite. So if you are behaving in a racist way, you are racist. There are no two ways around it. There's no neutral ground. Although it's been normalized, and so much of us think that it's okay, and we have accepted it in our society. And one of the thinkers around anti-racism, Ibram Kendi, writes about this, and he says, we all have been programmed to respond to human difference with fear and loathing, to handle that difference in three ways: either to ignore it, or if it's not possible, copy the dominant culture, and if we think it is subordinate, we destroy it. So the question is, was he destroying? Was he promoting something that will cause inequality and injustice? If you're doing that, you're racist.
Okay, and you mentioned something there that we all, perhaps in a way, kind of embedded in kind of racism culture, the culture of racism. Is it clearly black and white, or is it the fact that those are some of the prejudices that are hidden within human, but until you express them?
In my view, there is no neutral ground. there's no neutral policy. You're either promoting equality or inequality, knowingly or unknowingly. It's not about picking on you are being racist. It's about understanding that we can't make a choice to start to create equality. We can't make a choice to be anti-racist. Until we do that, it's highly unlikely that the actions you take will be anti-racist. So for me, it's not about black and white in the sense that you are a racist and I'm not. But you could be racist one moment and be anti-racist the next moment. So it's not black and white like that, but it's a choice, it's a decision. If you're not choosing to challenge racism within yourself and in the surroundings around you, if you haven't made that choice, you cannot claim to be actively acting as anti-racist. Therefore, what are you being?
And do you think perhaps this is maybe we should bring in Virginia Toyi now on the line. Virginia, in your line of work in terms of diversity and inclusion, how do you define this racism? How do you work with organizations to identify what is racism?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. First of all, I'm not an expert on racism, but from a DEI perspective,
yes,
I think it's important to understand and distinguish the different ways in which people experience racism. I think firstly, it can be institutional racism, where discrimination happens within the policies themselves, where people are systematically discriminated against due to policies. It doesn't matter who is doing it. It's in the system. And secondly, where there's direct racism, like what Pheona is saying, where it's direct, where there's prejudice, hostilities, and comments based on race or ethnicity. And this is manifested in verbally, where somebody just says it in your face, and this is visible, and it can be recognized. Now, the one that I'm maybe focused on myself is the third one, which is ignorance and stereotyping. And most of the people I work with are in this category sometimes. And it involves biases and misconceptions due to lack of awareness and ignorance and stupidity, sometimes I call it, and cultural incompetence, where I work a lot with people who are from different cultures. And this type of racism may not be intentional. I'll disagree with something that Pheona said there, where people sometimes are just racist because some people are not malicious. They're just ignorant and come from a place where they actually don't understand that they are being that way. And these are the people who I work with to educate them, and it requires education, mentoring, and self-reflection on their part. And some of them can then realize that that they are being racist without actually understanding it. So that's the way I look at it.
But surely, Virginia, sorry to interrupt there, but surely you would know that ignorance, offensive language, is recognizable by anybody, isn't it? Do you think some people are ignorant about offensive language?
What I'm trying to say is that some people may be prejudiced, and they repeat it when they know that what they're doing. That's different from someone who's an ignorant person who's been brought up in a culture where they don't actually recognize that what they're doing is racist. Somebody who's deep down in a village where they've never seen a black person, and they make a comment about your hair or something, and you assume that that's racist. But that's different from somebody who actually looks at you and makes a judgment knowingly. The first thing they ask is, where do you come from? That's very different. So I'm trying to distinguish between the different types of racism, and then we as educators, we have to understand where we're coming from, so that you meet people at the different levels of ignorance or knowledge.
Yes, Pheona, you want to come in there as well.
Yeah, I want to come back on the aspect that it's not malicious. I think that's conflating what racism and malice.
Yeah.
Being racist doesn't mean you're intentionally being malicious. Racism is internalized. It's views that cause racial inequality. It's views that cause racism. The people that make the policies are not necessarily trying to be malicious, but they will create a policy that creates racial inequality. That is racism. So it's not a suggestion that people who don't know or who know are the ones, people who know are the ones who are being racist. We must understand that. Let me give you an example. If I am driving and I get on the road and I hit somebody and they break their bones, right? Or something happens to them. When I go to court, I cannot say I didn't see them. You can't just begin by saying, oh, you see, I didn't mean to hurt them. They are hurt anyway. They are damaged. That's why you end up in court. Because you cannot feign not understanding that the green lights mean go and red lights mean stop. So ignorance is not, and you can't opt out because of ignorance. So racism is not an accusation of a person. That's why I'm saying it's not a destination. We are not saying you are racist, look at you. But we're saying the things you are doing are racist and you can't choose different. If you make a mistake, learn from it, change it, transform, and make a different decision. So racism is not malice. It's not necessarily whether it was intentional or not. It just is racism. That's why people are now making that argument that this guy, he's a great guy, he's helped the nation, he's done all these great things. That's not the point. The point is what he's done has created something that is unequal, that is not right, that is racist. He's created views that are impacting on a woman of color because of her color. That's racism. Doesn't matter whether it was intentional or not.
Okay. And on this question, I'll ask both of you. On the question of, does it really matter? Virginia, you mentioned about ignorance. And does it?
I said that one. I distinguished what we have to. We don't just hone in on what I said about ignorance.
Okay.
I discussed three types of racism. I discussed institutional racism.
Yes.
Where it's ingrained within the system, and it doesn't matter who is doing it. That's what Pheona is saying. It's not the person. It's the institution. And then I talked about direct racism, where somebody actually discriminates you or says something based on your race or your color or where you come from. And then I talked about some people who are ignorant. So I talked about three different types of issues. I didn't just say people are ignorant.
Absolutely. No, I got that. Yes, I was just trying to point out the fact that, because I know, there's several conversations, as you would understand as well, Virginia, that in different groups, in different parts of the community, there are people that accept racism, as a or racist attitude as people that are being ignorant. And should that be normalized in terms of a conversation that we should be having?
Yeah, that's where we have to have. It's essential to address and educate individuals when they make racist remarks, and which allows for learning and promoting inclusivity. However, when people repeat patterns of racist behavior or refuse to acknowledge and rectify their harmful language, and that can indicate an underlying racial bias or prejudice. So some people grow up in environments where racist attitudes are normalized, not challenged. People will repeat racist language without holding deeply ingrained racist beliefs, poor choice of words and cultural differences. That's why I'm trying to say that education does come in, and that's where we come in to educate people and to call it out. And even allies should call it out, so that when someone says something, even like people sitting in a dinner table eating dinner, and a grandparent says something racist, that should be called out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And Pheona, what should we be doing? What should the community be aware of? Where do we draw the lines of where this is grossly racism, or where this is ignorance, and and
Well, I'm not. The specific case about the specific case we're talking about. It's not what I'm talking about. Ignorance.
Yes, I get that, Virginia. So I was just asking Pheona in the studio. What do we need to do? Because let's say it, some people in our community do face racism, and sometimes they can accept it as ignorance, or they can become they can find it very offensive and react, perhaps negatively or whatever. I don't know which way they can react. It could go either way. And then what should we consider? Where do people in our community, and let's face it, most of us do face that every day in our lives. We can either ignore it, or we can accept it and then move on, or which is what has been suggested to Diana Abbott, that she should move on.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I think this is where it becomes really important to talk about anti-racism. I think it is important that we have conversations around diversity, inclusion, all those things, and also really important that we start to speak about anti-racism in the nature of what it means. So in terms of ignorance, obviously we will be ignorant. We've all internalized it. It's in our policies. It's in, like Virginia said, racism presents itself in 4 ways. It presents itself institutionally, where an institution refuses to acknowledge racism and to address it equitably. It presents itself culturally, where the culture is racist, and therefore when racism is presented, sometimes it will be seen as banter. It presents itself within our individuals, where somebody blatantly says something that is racist. And it does present itself in the systems where we see policies that have been formed structurally, and therefore we can't challenge that policy because that's how it is in all those forms. So what we need to do is address racism. Somebody put it really well and said, one of the thinkers said that it is like Newton's first law of motion, where if you don't meet it with the equal opposing force, it will continue in motion. So to challenge racism, we must now start to look at anti-racism. We must educate ourselves, and if somebody is ignorant, that's not a problem, because many of us will not know even the things that we do. Even we black people have internalized it, and we end up accepting it. We end up thinking that it's normal. Even in our cultures, there are things that we do, things that when I think about it, I think, how could we do that to ourselves? Even sometimes we present it over each other, where we treat somebody else as less because of things we've internalized, such as if they don't speak English that well, we think that they are not as intelligent. Things like that. So we need to educate ourselves, and we mustn't accept ignorance as a cop-out. We must educate ourselves when we find ignorance everywhere it presents itself. And if people get to a stage where we acknowledge that racism is in everyday life, in our experiences, then we can start to have a conversation about anti-racism. Our work focuses on training on anti-racism. But when we are doing that training, we must center the realities of those who experience racism. The challenge and the danger is that sometimes when we are doing this training, we are presenting the realities of the privileged who do not even experience racism. And we almost speak for them sometimes. We almost agree with them when that shouldn't be the case. And I'm not trying to kind of say that if they are ignorant, therefore let's do whatever to them. But I'm saying we cannot agree with what we know that is not right and is causing inequality. We cannot agree with the privileged who do not experience racism and continue to perpetuate racism because we see it as the dominant culture or because we've internalized it. We must start to challenge in every shape or form, individually, collectively, out with us, and in every way that we can.
Yeah, and you mentioned the work that you do as part of Bridal and
Radiant and
Bridal. I'll call it the other way around. Sorry, forgive my memory is gone this morning. Actually, but anyway. So and Virginia, in terms of what you do, I think collectively there seems to be a movement to develop the knowledge of institutions, organizations. What about the people? Because Pheona just mentioned in there how we have internalized racism. So, I mean, by that, black people have internalized racism, which means we accept certain things, even if they are racist.
That's a different topic.
That's a different topic. Okay, I know, Virginia. I know you're being very careful there, because as a seasoned professional, you don't want to respond to anything that is going to compromise your professional position.
In terms of my work, I've been working in institutions where my work is mainly to educate and to have racial justice awareness. And that's what I've been doing, and also creating allies, because we cannot do this alone. We cannot. I don't shout from the outside. I try and work from the inside, so that the people are aware. Like I did a training of 100 facilitated training for 300 employees in where I used to work. I won't mention who, but just for racial awareness, and that's the way. That's what I believe that we should be doing, and then creating allies within institutions, so that everybody is working towards educating and calling out racism.
Do you think we need allies more, or?
First and foremost, I have to say, V and I know each other.
Okay.
And
full disclosure. There you go.
Yes, and I appreciate the work that she's doing. So it's really necessary, and it's important to do that work. However, I think what we need to understand is this learning is a journey. Okay, so 17 years ago, I never even spoke about race. I didn't even know to talk about it. Completely never said anything. I lived in London for 10 years. I experienced racism, and I didn't see it as a thing. So there is.
Do you think you accepted it?
Yeah, I accepted it. In fact, I'd internalized it to the extent that I thought it was normal. And I remember having a friend that was really upset with one of our managers where I used to work. She understood racism better than I did, but I didn't know what it was. And she used to get really angry with this manager because I was training people to become supervisors, and I was never becoming the supervisor. And she was upset about it. I didn't know why she was upset. I had a job and I was happy. So I think that we are all on a journey, and the more we learn, the more we can challenge. I must say that what V is saying about allyship, first of all, I don't agree with the term allyship, and that's not to do with individuals. It's just me. In what I have learned, this is not about allyship. This is about you and I working towards the same goal. We must all have the same vision. If you're saying you're an ally, who are you an ally to? To yourself? Are we not all the same society trying to challenge the same issues? So in some ways, I've learned to challenge allyship the same way I've learned to challenge the word help. You are not helping me. We're helping each other. We're working to the same society. So, but that's something that obviously other people have a different view, and I appreciate that. However, what I want to say about the way in which we work, there is a general fear and concern that if you speak about anti-racism overtly, and that's true, that if you speak about it overtly, you're suggesting people are racist, and therefore people are scared. And therefore people are uncomfortable. But we must learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. In our trainings, we've trained over 800 people in different organizations. None of those people, except one person, and that was recently, that one person said, I disagree that there is racism. But not once have we left with people feeling like we pointed fingers at them. They always feel like, wow, this was actually very insightful, this was very educational, this was very helpful. And I think we must understand that if I'm speaking about inequality, I'm not pointing a finger at you. I'm saying we can do different. And the conversations should not be a one-off. They should be ongoing, because the more we learn, the more we unlearn. And therefore, it becomes, we've kind of allowed racism to be so normalized that it's easier to kind of have that conversation in a generic term, in concern about, people feeling like we're calling them out as racist. But we now have to learn to normalize anti-racism as a conversation, the same way we talk about anti-poverty. If you're talking about anti-poverty, people are not going to say you're calling me, you're saying that I'm doing something because I'm rich. So when I'm talking about anti-racism, I'm not saying you're racist. I'm saying let's do something about it in society.
Wonderful. I think, yes. Come, you want to come in there, Virginia? Yes, let's give you the last.
Yeah, I need to go, but before I go, I think Pheona is what Pheona is saying. It's all a journey, because I've attended a few sessions where even there was one recently with Professor Jeff Palmer, and he was trying to explain that racism is the race is a social concept. It's a social construct. We're all one race anyway. We're not genetically. We're not different. It's just it's a construct of society. So it's deconstructing that ratio, kind of the fact that we are different races when we are not, and it's a difficult subject. And I've been in some Pheona's sessions, and she's very good at talking about anti-racism, which is great, because we have to think about anti-racism rather than thinking about racial awareness. So.
You're right.
I'm just.
So what? Sorry. So we have to talk about anti-racism, not just about racial awareness. What's the difference? Sorry.
Pheona.
That's why I'm asking Pheona.
No, I think they are interrelated, but I think racial. What V was talking about there in terms of racial justice. Yes, we are the same race. Yes, it is a social construct, and the challenge is that social constructs permeate and are embedded in our society and in our cultures. But we have to understand the history of racism. Okay, so racism begins at a point when people, doctors even, start to say that black people are subhuman. They constructed that. They started to prove it biologically. And therefore, that is what informed slave trade. Because it said, because we are subhuman, like animals basically, we can do all this donkey work, and they are superior, they don't, it's different. So to undo that requires deconstruction. And I completely agree with Virginia, that's true. And I think what we now need to continue to do is not just to educate ourselves on racism, but to educate ourselves on how to deconstruct racism and how to take action. What do I do? If you're a policymaker, start to review those policies. If you are involved within an organization, start to audit your organization. In what ways are you creating, unknowingly or knowingly, inequality? We are not the different races, but we're different ethnicities. And as different ethnicities, still we have managed to create superiority and assume others as inferior to us because of their color. So we cannot ignore the conversation, nor can we just have a conversation and leave it there. It's not just about creating an understanding that it's a social construct. It's going beyond that and deconstructing that. It takes time, and maybe people sometimes are uncomfortable or fearful or not sure that we can actually undo it. But if we can learn, we can unlearn. Okay. We can deconstruct.
You can deconstruct. Virginia, thank you very much for joining us. I know you have to go because you're somewhere. Thank you for making the time to come on. I think she's gone already. That's fine. Now, Pheona, I think my last question will be, does the racism row, which is ongoing at the moment, highlight how deep racism is still alive in multicultural Britain?
I think it is. I think the row just really highlights the challenges that we have. And again, I think the challenge is that we focus on the individual, but racism in this one instance presented itself in all four forms. We could see the person who said the words, and let's not take it lightly. When somebody says, you should be shot, and it makes me hate other black women, in this one person, we are able to see how they then generalized all black women because they felt hate towards that black woman. You know, so first of all, we see the individual racism present itself. Then culturally, we see how people are actually saying, you know what, it's not such a problem. It's just something, he just did something wrong. Well, what's wrong with it? If you're not agreeing that it's racism, what is wrong with what he said? What makes it, they're saying it's rude. What makes it rude? You know, something is rude if you are doing something rude. What makes that rude? Why are we not going far enough? So culturally, we just don't see a problem with it. Institutionally, they failed to deal with it for days. They did not say anything about it.
Of course.
You know, and there is...
That's been the UK government.
Exactly. They did nothing about it. They didn't seek to do anything about it until people started to make more noise about it. Even worse, when she stood up, you know, this incensed me. Diane Abbott stood up 46 times in Parliament to speak for herself. And they are speaking about her without her.
It's like having the accused in the court and then not allowing them to speak.
Exactly. Her voice is muted. This is what racism
Or the victim,
does.
yeah.
Exactly. They
case.
mute our voices. We get muted. You know, this happens a lot where instead of you
That was
speaking
disgraceful,
up,
yeah.
it was disgraceful. Why can she not be allowed? So even that failure, but then it also presented itself structurally because some people were saying, oh, there's protocol, sometimes there are things to follow, maybe she didn't need to speak. Well,
no.
in this instance, she needed to speak.
No, absolutely so, 100%, because it's like having the victim of a crime basically in the court and not allowing them to speak.
Exactly.
And I think that was ridiculous, you know. So, therefore, they talk about multicultural, diverse government, UK government. What do you make of that?
So, multiculturalism is so much fun when we're eating each other's food.
yes, okay.
It's so much fun.
I can see the smile. I don't know if anyone could notice on camera there, but you can see the smile on when I asked that question. Pheona just lights up and they really wanted to say that.
It's so much fun when we are saying, oh, we have black people in the room. You know, we have representation. It all looks so rosy until the black woman starts to speak up for herself. Then it completely changes. So I think we're a multicultural society. I do agree. I mean, I love UK. I have lived in the UK for more than half of my life. So I appreciate. I think we're a society that, you know, that live with each other. And yes, in so many ways, you know, UK is a great place to be. Scotland is a great place to be. I need to say Glasgow because Glasgow is where it is. I think, and when you think about like Glasgow and Scotland, we're a very friendly city, a very friendly nation. I think those things we cannot take away. But we need to understand that you can be racist and still be polite.
Yeah.
We need to understand that it's not one or the other. They can exist dually. We can be racist and still be helpful. You know, it's not that because you have been racist, therefore you are a monster. That's a misconception. Racism is not monstrous. Not always. Sometimes it is, to be fair.
It's not malicious.
Yes, it's not always malicious, but sometimes it is. But we need to understand that multiculturalism doesn't take away from the fact that.
So does it matter now the context at which that is? Where do you draw the lines? You say this is malicious. This sounds malicious. This sounds dangerous. Or you know, where do you draw the line?
I mean, if you're saying somebody needs to be shot, surely there's no there's no two ways about that.
Yeah, okay.
Even if it wasn't about race, surely
Agree.
that is not right. So I think it's complex in terms of drawing the line. But what I would say is, for me, we should all be learning, and we should always be learning, and we should give people the opportunity to learn. If you have been racist, you should be given the opportunity to learn, and it should have consequences if it has dire consequences for the person, especially that has experienced racism. I think there has to be a way in which we say, okay, so what are you willing to do about it? Are you willing to change, transform, do something different? To you can't undo it, but you can have restitution. You can do something about it. Now, I'm not saying that in this case. I think in this case, there's so much that has gone on. It has to be addressed in all forms. But when it is an individual, that, you know, we have schools, young people in schools. They will say things that they are parroting from their parents or from their families or from the street. They don't even understand the consequences. They should be allowed to learn, but there should be consequences, especially in cases like this one, where people, where the inequality and the justice goes beyond, and we can see the consequences of what Diane Abbott experiences. Even beyond that, to us women in the community, in the society, us who are speaking about anti-racism, you know, it has wider consequences. So there has to be a conversation, but beyond that, there have to be consequences when the damage is beyond, but also it's a complex issue. I don't want to draw a line, but I do want to explain that there is a space for consequences, there's a space for learning, there's a space for growth.
Yeah, okay, and that space for learning, it's would that involve education in educational institutions, the schools, for example? Do you think so?
Yes, I think we have to be educating in schools. There has to be an education in schools. We know that in Scotland, we know that schools, especially high schools as well, young people are leaving school quite early. They are leaving in year 4 or year 5 because they cannot cope with racism. It should be within our institutions, public sector. So the interesting thing about racial equality is that the first time we hear about racial equality is when it is at the UN Convention of Human Rights. The first human rights were about racial inequality. How have we moved so far from that we've got to the point where speaking about racism is a problem? Not only that, when in London, after the Stephen Lawrence murder, we had the Macpherson report, which then defined institutional racism. Out of that institutional racism came the public sector equality duty to treat everybody equally, regardless of their color. And yet, that public sector equality duty is not spoken about like that. So we need to educate ourselves, we need to educate the institutions, but beyond that, it's not just about education, it's taking the action. So for me, the intent is not enough. The action is more important.
Pheona Matovu, thank you very much, anti-racist practitioner, and thank you for coming on this morning.